Hey everybody, welcome back. This is Shane with Shane Media. Today we're going to go ahead and discuss Barbarian. Let's get into it. So this won't be a traditional movie review where I just give you my pros, cons, and mixed of the movie, but more so a walkthrough of the movie, and I'll be giving my thoughts and opinions as I go. So let's talk about it. Barbarian is a 2022 film directed by Zach Krager, starring Justin Long, Georgina Campbell, and Bill Skarsgård. By now, I'm sure most of you have seen this movie, so this is going to be a spoiler review. So if you haven't seen it and still want to go in blind, this is your cue on 3. 1, 2, 3. So talk about subverting expectations. This movie was all over the place, and I mean that in the best way possible. In the opening few minutes of this movie, I was convinced it was just another predictable by-the-numbers story about a girl who ends up in the wrong place, meets a guy that she thinks is a nice, good guy, and then he ends up being a creep or a serial killer, and now he's after her, blah, blah, blah. We've seen some variation of that template hundreds of times in movies. But this movie takes a couple of hard turns in the first 30 minutes or so, and I had no idea where it was going. And as a horror fan, I can't tell you how satisfying it was to get that experience out of a new movie because, let's face it, I think we can all agree that as horror fans, we usually get the short end of the stick where creativity is concerned. But this movie really delivered. And as usual, Justin Long was a blast to watch on screen. But we'll get to him shortly. Movie opens with Georgina Campbell's character, Tess, showing up to an Airbnb in Detroit late at night in the middle of a storm, only to find out that there's been a booking mistake. She knocks on the door, and who answers it? Freaking Pennywise, a.k.a. Bill Skarsgård. And let me just say, guys, this opening scene was shot very well. The way it's lit and the storm really sets the mood and gives you a real sense of dread and just gives it a very eerie atmosphere. And contributing to that eerie atmosphere and that sense of dread is Bill Skarsgård himself. When he comes to the door, you find out that him and her both supposedly booked this Airbnb, and they even show each other their confirmation receipts on their phones. But we, the audience, we're really not sure what to believe. We're not sure if one of them's lying. But honestly, the way the shots are framed and even in the dialogue, you can tell that setting you up to believe that Bill Skarsgård's character is definitely up to no good. You can see that Tess clearly doesn't trust him. And I mean, who can blame her? I don't trust the guy, and I definitely wouldn't trust him if I was in her shoes. And honestly, it feels like the filmmakers told Skarsgård to dial his creep factor up to an 11 for these scenes. And he does just that. If they gave out awards for being ominous and suspicious, he would definitely be nominated for what he did in this movie. And because he was Pennywise, I mean, you're already instantly thinking this guy is up to no good. Because we know that he is superior at playing movie villains. But as the movie goes on, it actually starts to really lighten the mood and begins to feel more like a romantic comedy, believe it or not. I mean, I knew nothing about this movie going into it, so I honestly would not have been surprised if this movie would have just turned into a romantic comedy between these two. But that's not what happens. In fact, this movie is anything but a romantic movie. It does, however, have some genuinely funny parts. I mean, it's definitely not a full-blown comedy or anything, but there's some genuine situational humor in this movie, and most of it involving Justin Long, which I'm sure surprises nobody. But something I noticed that I actually haven't heard anyone else talk about or bring up is that it honestly felt like the filmmakers of this movie were trying to do their own version of what Scream did with Drew Barrymore in 1996, but with Bill Skarsgård. So you've got Bill Skarsgård, and he's a very recognizable actor, especially with horror fans because of his role as Pennywise. And so when you see him in the opening scene of this movie, your first assumption is that he's either the primary villain of this movie, or at the very least going to have some other significant role to the overall plot. But nope. The only significant thing this dude does in the entire movie is that he's the first one to die. Yep, the clown is down, folks. And not only is he the first one to die, but he doesn't make it 30 minutes into this movie. And you don't even feel bad for him when he dies because he only dies because he's being a dumbass. Tess goes in the basement and gets locked down there and tries to find a way out and finds a secret dungeon down there with a bed and cages and a video camera and basically one of the scariest things a human being could probably find in a stranger's house. So she runs upstairs terrified and hysterical, as anybody probably would be in that situation, and tells Bill Skarsgård's character what she finds down there. And, instead of doing the reasonable thing and calling the police and at least having it looked at, no, this dude wants to go down there and investigate. And it's like, dude, what are you going to do if you get down there and you find out she's right? You're not a freaking Avenger. So this is actually one of the parts of the movie that I don't like because I think it's way too unbelievable. I mean, I think anybody, or at least almost anybody in that situation, would probably not go down there to investigate in the first place. But once they got down there and they saw the tunnel and they saw the cages and the bed and the camera, I don't think they would actually go down there. I mean, we as human beings are designed for survival. And doing dumb things like that is not how you survive. So as much as I really did love this movie, that is a part of the movie I had a pretty big problem with. But Tess goes down there after him to look for him because he's down there for a while, which, again, I don't believe anybody, especially her, would do because she literally knows what's down there. But I digress. A bit of looking for him, she finally catches up to him and they get attacked by this huge, inbred, almost superhuman monstrosity of a woman, who we also find out is the primary villain of this movie. Or maybe she's the secondary villain. I guess it really depends on how you look at it. But either way, she kills Bill Skarsgård and he's out of this movie for good. But then we cut to black and we officially get to see Justin Long in all of his Justin Long glory. And right here, we find out that within this movie, Justin Long is an actor, and he's driving down the road, and he gets a phone call from his agent or somebody. There's two people on the phone with him, and they're letting him know that a fellow actress of a show they're both working on is accusing him of sexual assault. And in this same scene, they fire him. They tell him that the show is going to move forward without him. And so now you've got this completely new side story going on with Justin Long, and so you're watching this, and now you're interested because you're curious how any of this has anything to do with everything we just saw in the opening of this movie with Bill Skarsgård and Georgina Campbell. So basically next we see Justin Long sitting down with like his financial advisor, and he's going over all the legal fees and trying to basically figure out, okay, how much money do I have? And when will I be broke? And the guy lets him know that basically at his rate of spending, he'll be broke in just a couple of months. So then they start going over different options, and you find out that Justin Long has properties in Detroit that he's going to try and sell to get some of his money back. And even though I still really didn't know where this movie was going, right here was where I was finally able to start connecting some dots. And now I was able to at least get a general idea of how they were going to put Justin Long's character, who was in California, in the midst of our opening characters in Detroit. And then you find out that the Airbnb that Georgina Campbell and Bill Skarsgård were staying in the opening of the movie with the tunnel dungeon in the basement is actually Justin Long's house, or one of them anyways. And so he goes to Detroit to get the Airbnb house ready to be put on the market, and unless I missed something, I felt like they didn't do a very good job of explaining whether or not he knew that his house was being used as an Airbnb. At one point seemed like maybe he did, but then he acted surprised and mad when he realized that people had been staying there, so I really don't know. Maybe somebody can let me know in the comments. So anyways, while he's down there, he meets up with a friend of his. They go out, they get drunk, and at one point even has a conversation with his mom, and he starts to talk to both of them about the girl who's making the accusations about him. And honestly, at this point, you're really not sure what to think about this guy. It's very similar to what they did with Bill Skarsgård, where you're really not sure where the story is taking his character or whether you should trust him or not. But there's a scene where he thinks somebody's down in his basement because he hears some noises, and obviously we, the audience, know exactly what's going on in that basement, but Justin Long doesn't. You find out that he doesn't even know, like he never knew about that dungeon and tunnel in his basement. And this is actually where you get some of the most genuinely funny scenes in the entire movie. And I like it because it's not overplayed too much. In fact, it's just situational humor, but it's done to almost perfection. And it really lightens the mood of the movie a little bit, which was kind of nice. I mean, it's always nice anytime a movie can break up the tension with scenes like this. But I mean, this dude goes down in the dungeon basement tunnel thing, and he sees the bed and the camera and the cages and the tunnel and doesn't care about any of it. Like, all of that just escapes his mind somehow. And the only thing he is concerned about is whether or not he's able to use that as extra square footage to put on his marketing ad for selling the house. And I mean, the way they execute this scene is just so funny. And this is where you really get a better idea of what kind of a guy Justin Long is. And you find out this dude is just completely wrapped up in himself. And while he's down there, of course, he runs into Mother. That's the name of the inbred monster chick that we seen earlier who killed Bill Skarsgård. And she throws him down in like a little cage hole thing with Georgina Campbell. So now we get to see her character again. And the only thing I can say about this entire scene is boop. And that's all I'm going to say about it, because if you haven't seen this movie, you have got to go into this scene blind because it is freaking hilarious. But somewhere in all of this, we get a flashback scene to the 80s. And I know it's the 80s because the guy's listening to the radio and they mention the Reagan-Bush administration. But what's funny is the first time I watched this, I honestly didn't know it was even a flashback scene. The way they transitioned it into the movie, I honestly thought it was just another storyline that they were going to merge into the first two they just introduced. But no, it was a flashback. But at this part of the movie, we get introduced to Richard Brake, who we find out is actually a serial predator of the 80s. And then we also find out that he's having babies with the women he's assaulting. And that's how we ended up with Mother, the villain of the current timeline of the movie. But that's why I said she may be the primary or secondary villain, depending on how you look at it, because a lot of people, myself included, would say that Richard Brake is the real monster of this movie. But I digress again. We cut back to current time, and while Mother is distracted with Justin Long, Georgina Campbell manages to escape, and she actually goes and tries to get help, even runs to the police, who do nothing. They don't believe her. They think she's crazy, so once again, she's on her own, and then we get more dumb decision-making by characters. She feels bad for Justin Long, so she goes right back inside and right back down to the dungeon. And I go back to my earlier point. You are not an Avenger. There is literally nothing you can do. I get that the police you talked to didn't help you, but okay, you go find somebody else and try to find someone who'll believe you. But you don't just go right back into a helpless situation. That just doesn't seem like a realistic decision that a person would really make in that situation. While all this is going on, Justin Long manages to get away from Mother for a minute, runs into a room, locks himself in, where he runs into Richard Brake's character, who by this point is old and decaying. I mean, he's sick and dying, and while Justin Long is in there, he sees all the videotapes that Richard Brake had recorded over the years of what he was doing to these women, and he calls the guy out on being a monster, and the guy grabs a gun off his little side table and kills himself. So his character is dead and gone and completely out of the picture, and while all this is going on, Georgina Campbell is heading back down to help Justin Long, and when she gets down there, Justin Long gets startled and out of fear ends up shooting her. I actually thought she was dead the first time I watched it, and I think that's what they were going for. They wanted you to think she was dead, but she didn't die. She's just laying there badly wounded, and Justin Long obviously feels bad because he just shot her on accident, and so he picks her up and he carries her out of there, and they take off running and try to seek shelter with the homeless man that you see earlier in the movie. And while they're sitting there, they think they're safe, but Mother comes busting through and kills the homeless man and then chases them. So before I get too far ahead of myself, I do want to mention the homeless man's death, because this dude gets the most disrespectful death in the entire movie. I mean, this chick rips his arm off and then literally just beats him to death with it. That's like one of the most disrespectful ways a person could be killed. In my opinion, anyways. But, moving on. Also, another thing I forgot to mention was while they were sitting there with the homeless man, you've got Justin Long reflecting on what kind of a man he is and who he is as a person, and he's sitting there basically trying to figure out if he's actually a good person who's just done some bad things, or if he's literally a bad person. And he's literally sitting there talking this through with himself and Georgina Campbell's character and the homeless man. And it seems like ultimately he decides that he's just a good person who's done bad things, but that he can change. And it appears like he even wants to change. But while they're being chased by the mother character, they get cornered at the top of like a water tower of some sort or something like that. And in an attempt to save himself, he wants to distract Mother, so he grabs Georgina Campbell by her head or her hair or whatever and throws her off of this water tower so that Mother will jump down after her. And so right then and there, we finally see what kind of a person Justin Long really is in this movie. So he really is just a very self-absorbed person who cares about nobody but himself. So anyways, he throws her off the tower, and just like he planned, Mother jumps down after her, and I'm really not sure how it happens, but somehow Georgina Campbell actually lands on top of Mother when they land at the bottom. But even though that doesn't make sense, I'm not going to nitpick that too much. But then Justin Long runs back down there and realizes she's alive and tries to wake her up and apologize to her. But Mother jumps up too and grabs him by the head and puts her thumbs in his eyes and starts gouging them out. It actually looks very similar to how Michael killed Big John in Halloween Kills, except in my opinion, this was a little more gnarly. But anyway, she definitely kills him with that little move. And then Georgina Campbell takes the gun from earlier and shoots and kills Mother, and then takes off running to a musical cue. The end. So I did have some minor nitpicks with this movie, mainly with some of the unrealistic character decisions, but if you can suspend your disbelief a little bit and just go into this movie expecting a fun time, I think you'll really enjoy it. So with that being said, I'm going to give this movie a 7.5. Anyways, guys, that's it for this video. Please like and share it, and if you haven't already, please subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.